Hey guys, I must say, today's episode is one dear to me, as it is with someone who I hold in very high esteem and regard as one of the most potent sources of inspiration in my life. More importantly, it is with someone with whom I have sailed a friendship across a long, if turbulent journey through the oceans of life. This person is Zade Sadek. Zade and I shared the same school for many years and eventually a high school friends group that continues to only grow and strengthen with the ebbing tides of the separate lives we lead. By now, you're probably approaching the limits of a pun-induced seasickness, but I assure you, the ride has just begun. Zade is currently studying medicine at the University of New Giza, delving deeper into the bloody waters of biology and its applications. On the side, he engages in creating music, Brazilian jiu-jitsu training, reading, and attempting to conserve the lifeline of modern education through the most radical means. On this occasion, we discuss his background and how it led him to science, his understanding of education in Egypt and elsewhere, how he has come to see the future of education through 6 guiding principles, and what the state of science is as it stands can tell us. Knowing Zade so well, Youssef and I frequently engaged him in a spirit of epistemic sparring throughout the episode, only to be spun around by the waves of his ideas, and to realize that Zade is a formidable opponent, no matter what you're engaging him in. Now, without any more fine print, we welcome you aboard the Experiments in Dialogue ferry with my best friend, Zade Sadek. Okay, welcome to the Experiments in Dialogue podcast. I'm Ahmed Mack, and I'm here today, as I always am, with my co-host Youssef Yusri, and we are joined by one of my closest friends and someone who I'm honored to have on the podcast and have been trying to get on the podcast for quite a bit of time, Zade Sadek. Now, Zade is a very interesting individual, as you'll see, who we have several intersecting ideas and concepts with, but he also has his own unique view of things, and that's really why we had him on here. So, with that said, how are you, Zade?
I'm good, man. How are you, Mac?
I'm doing well. We're recording this during the pandemic, as we have been recording for quite a while now. And how has that been for you?
The quarantine?
Yeah, quarantine and the pandemic in general.
Well, since the beginning of the quarantine, I've pretty much been focused on studying for finals, or at least through midway. So I haven't really felt the effects of that kind of isolation or long-term isolation up until very recently when I finished finals. So I for sure it's taxing on the psyche, for sure, man. I just haven't felt it as much as others because I've had to be in it. You know, there's a difference of when you're forced into it as compared to someone who has no other option.
Yeah, no, I get it. Now, how's Yusri? How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm fine. Things are going well.
Yeah? Oh, that's good. Mm-hmm. That's good. Now, Zade, as you know, I've been meaning to get you on the podcast because we have a lot of topics that we share an interest in, but also just I've been very interested in hearing your views. And Youssef and I originally were considering you as one of our first podcast guests. And
that is an honor, man.
Oh, the honor is ours, really. And honestly, we have been trying to make sure that the podcast is a platform that you would be happy to be on, really, more than anything.
Of course.
You know, you were one of the first founding members, really, when it came to this podcast before it was even a podcast, right? Back when we had live events. And you moderated one of our events back then as well. Just give us a bit of an overview of how exactly you saw Experiments in Dialogue when you first, came into contact with it.
Well, I attended the first ever session as an observer. Like I wasn't on the panel or anything, and I just appreciated the fact that this kind of discussion was being not just discussion or just like this kind of event was happening in Egypt.
Yeah,
I mean it was relatively unheard of, this kind of thing going on, and I just appreciated the fact that people want to hear about this, want to talk about this, want to come from all over places in Cairo just to hear people talk about this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So by the next session, I think I asked you if I could be part of the panel.
Yeah.
But I'm not really the best with public speaking, so I was kind of nervous, to be honest. But in the moderator role, which is what I did on the second session, I felt like it was worth it. Like it's good being there. It's good having those talks, no matter even if you don't really gain anything out of it as like a
monetarily, maybe, yeah,
exactly, or even exactly monetarily. It's just good to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And you served as a very good moderator in terms of you had the basic ability to inspire people to speak on the panel, which is why we really picked you. We knew that you had very similar values to the one we were trying to basically demonstrate throughout the events and eventually now the podcast, right? Because what we were trying to do was build a platform for dialogue, and you were completely on board with that. Now,
yeah,
I'm more interested, just to get our discussion started a bit, for you to give us a brief intro to who you are, and just I will have introduced you more formally at the beginning, but exactly what your interests are.
Well, here's the thing. I consider myself a generalist, in that I'm really interested in like a wide variety of things in general in life. I'm not focused on any one thing, and that actually might be a deficiency, or at least from the job perspective, from the vocational perspective, that might be a bad thing. But no, man, I just enjoy so many things in life, so many disciplines, topics.
Yeah.
Well, specifically, I'd say I'm into music.
Yeah.
I play the guitar. I'm in medicine. I study medicine. I love science in general. I mean, it's kind of a vague question, but I'm into anything pretty much.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm really just asking that, kind of knowing the answer to a significant degree, but trying to bring out from you kind of basically the next conversational topic, which is what exactly got you into science? What got you the passion for science? We're going to go into music probably a bit later on in the discussion, but just to begin with, let's have a look at science and how exactly you developed your passion for it, and especially given where you come from and the region you come from. How did that influence you?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd say that I've had the great fortune of having really great role models around me in my life. Predominantly my family members, my uncle, my father, my grandfather. Each of them with their own characteristics that kind of influenced me and also passed down to me. My uncle is a research scientist and a physician.
Oh, okay.
And he's always been the most deterministic when it comes to truth value, scientific truth. So I feel like that rubbed off on me a little. My grandfather has always been just the nitty gritty, like whatever is necessary to get the work done. He'd always tell me that he'd work 18 hours a day, I used to work 18 hours a day, and these kids
grandfather talk,
kind of
yeah. Wisdom.
So I really appreciated that. My father's a businessman, and he's like a bona fide businessman. Like he's persuasive.
Yeah.
That kind of thing also rubbed off on me. Those are direct role model figures in my life. But when it comes to medicine and why I got into medicine in general, honestly, the first origins of me wanting to get into medicine was through watching Dr. House.
Oh,
the TV
really?
show.
Oh, damn! I love that show.
Yeah, I was just so fascinated by the fact that there's a division in the hospital where it's specifically for patients who no one else can diagnose, and there's no other alternatives, and this is the one dude or the one section in the whole world that can fix this kind of person. And now that I'm in medicine, I've been in it for 3 years now, I realize that's not a thing at all. That is not an occupation.
Yeah, so you can't grow up to be Dr. House.
Yeah,
that's not on the menu.
So well, those were my origins. Obviously, my passion for medicine have matured over the years. That was when I was 8, But since then, my passion for science and medicine and just the truth, seeking the truth in general, have matured through reading. Predominantly reading, actually. Reading has been a huge part of my life.
Yeah, tell us more about that. What kind of books would you say were very influential, maybe slightly earlier and now as well? What's affecting you now?
Okay, well, I used to have these. I forgot what there's this series of books called the DC books. I think that's what it's called. I had it when I was younger, and they're pretty much like specific disciplines, but kind of summarized for in kid form for like kids to understand. So I was passed down this anatomy book when I was very young, and I was just fascinated by that, man. Like all the intricacies of the human body, and it was just amazing to me. That's one of the things that got me into medicine specifically. But then I'd read into everything. Like I said, I'm a generalist.
Yeah.
So I read into evolution, psychology, anthropology, geology, everything. Anything I can get my hands on, pretty much.
You say you developed your interest in truth and your passion for truth kind of as a direct inspiration from your uncle. Can you talk more about truth and what relationship you have to it, and whether you were always somewhat of kind of a seeker for truth, or whether you came to appreciate it a bit later?
Oh, most definitely I came to appreciate it later on in life. I mean, early on, I wasn't really, I mean, I was kind of lost for a long time in my life. I think we're all lost to some extent, but I mean, like actually lost, like there's no direction, no trajectory, nothing. So it only started actually very recently when I was in California. 2 years ago, when I was completely alone, because I'm from Egypt, right? So I live predominantly in Egypt, and when I went to California for university, I was alone, right? I was left to defend myself and fight for my life, It was then when my back was against the wall that I thought to myself, I have to get a specific trajectory in life, I have to figure things out.
Find a niche.
I need to know where to go, even if I don't know how to get to it now. At least I need to know how to get to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I started reading into. I mean, I've always been reading. I got back into reading. Like I think you talked about this, or was it Yusri? I think.
Yeah,
on the previous podcast.
Yeah, I talked about having a hiatus and then getting back into reading, rediscovering the love for reading. Yeah,
that happened to me in almost the same way. I spent like a couple of years, maybe like 2-3 years, where I wasn't reading as much. I was just kind of living life. But I got back into it when I was in California.
Yeah. And
one of the main books that inspired me, that completely changed my whole perspective, was this book called Behave by Robert Sapolsky.
Brilliant. Yeah.
That is like my Bible.
Yeah. We've joked a few times and said it's the behavioral biology Bible, right?
It really is.
I think that's your quote, actually. The behavioral biology Bible. Yeah. Yeah, but
man,
go on. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that kind of really jump-started my whole seeking knowledge, the path to seeking knowledge, seeking truth, no matter what I lose along the way, no matter what,
Yeah, I mean, we'll go into more details about your trip to California and all that. I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to discuss. But right before that, maybe let's talk about school and growing up in Egypt. I know your background is a bit unique as someone growing back in Egypt, just given, I don't know how much you want to share, but just given your parental household and, how you felt like a bit of a stranger. Just tell us more, I think, about that and how your school experience was, academically or not so academically, whatever.
Sure. So I come from I'm not of one pure ethnicity, so to say. And my father is Egyptian and my mother is American. And I grew up in that kind of household where it was, there was synergy between them, because my father is not, he's not the typical Egyptian, right? He has more Western ideology and standards, so it worked with my mother, who is Western, obviously. But that was within the household. Outside, I mean, to be honest, man, I felt marginalized a lot of the time. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was just perceiving it differently. I don't know. I mean, but I really did feel marginalized a lot, outcasted a lot, in different spheres of life as a child and school and such.
For what reasons, you'd say? What would you say the reasons you would you were outcast?
Well, first and foremost, the most obvious, my skin color. So much for white privilege. I mean, there was no white privilege happening here.
That's actually pretty good. You're the best argument against white privilege. Yeah.
I mean, that was the most obviously like the stark contrast between me and most of my peers. Also, I'm freckled, or at least I used to be more freckled. So that's kind of an anomaly in Egyptian.
Definitely
in the Egyptian population.
Were you like called? Were you called like a pretty boy?
Man, I was called all kinds of things. Most people attest to
that. I remember. I mean, to be fair, I even partook in a bit of it, just joking. Guilty as charged there, but
and all's fair in love and war.
It wasn't meant to be mean, you know. It was actually more friendly than anything. Yeah, but there were people who were malicious. I remember that, you know.
No, because it happens to be that if you're of like paler or like skin in Egypt, you'd be called somehow like more feminine. You're somehow more like
pretty boy.
Like I don't know. You're
man, like how can you let the sun burn you like that, man? Are you not tough enough? What's wrong with you, bro?
Man up, man. What's wrong with you?
Where's your melanin, man? Anyway, that was when I was growing up. Obviously, as I got older and I got more accustomed to life in Egypt and the customs and all that, and I obviously gained friends, both in school and outside of school, and I just got more comfortable with it. Obviously, it's never going to change. Like the stark contrast is never going to change. You know, my accent in Arabic, I mean, is not exactly perfect. The way I speak isn't always the most coherent. Again, in Arabic, and I don't really hold all the values that most people hold. I hold some of them for sure, but not all of them. But I'm okay with it, man. I accept it, you know.
Yeah.
Like I enjoy it. I enjoy my position.
Can I just bring you back a bit and ask about how school was for you academically? Was that where, basically what I want to ask is, did school foster in you the love for learning and truth and science, or did it actually work against it, you think? Or both?
Well, I think
dichotomy.
I think it's worked in both directions, in both ways. When it comes to helping foster that kind of that love for science and truth, I don't think it really helped in that. It was very formalized, very rigid. It's hard to find beauty in that kind of like the beauty of nature. In that kind of systematic. I'm going to say sheep-like teaching. You know, it's really hard to find that. And when you do, it's usually because you have a very talented teacher. And I was very lucky to have maybe 2-3 of those, you know, in school. But that's pretty much it. But on the other hand, there is a benefit to constantly being tested, constantly being challenged on how well you can apply your knowledge in different ways in general, you know, and that's what school does pretty much.
Did you always think that was a useful thing? You know, I know at times we've talked about education, and we used to see the rigid systems in general, or at least I did, as kind of all bad. And I think as we've grown up to some degree, we've learned the value of that. Is that the case with you as well?
I think with me, I just became more, because it's like a really hot topic for me, education and the educational system. So I really focused on it. But maybe I was naive in my criticisms when I was younger. But now my criticisms are more matured. You know, they don't come from a place of emotion or from a place of like anything like that. It's more out of a place of logic and
principles.
What should be done. You know, yes, principles, exactly.
Maybe to add to what Zade just said about what did he say? You said systemic sheep flocking,
sheep-like teaching.
Sheep-like teaching. Yeah, I mean to add to that, the minister of education in Egypt had his educational goals as part of his agenda, and one of them, like the one issued to the public, right? And one of them was to, if I'm even literally kind of translating this from Arabic, which was to literally annihilate all difference in thinking and to unify
whole
and to
I'm sorry, I was
and now the podcast is not ready for children.
It's not really PG, whatever was it. And yeah, look, so I really get that. I really get that get that through school. Even your maturing of ideas maybe was more
you
in
really
line
say
of.
that?
No, it's absolutely. It was محو الأفكار محو الاختلاف الفكري وتوحيد النظام التعليمي. It was exactly like that.
Man, that is just wrong, man.
Yeah,
that
no,
is so
it
wrong.
really was, yeah. And
Let's stay away from that, though.
For this to be a goal really gives you some indication of the kind of pathological thinking that goes into designing educational systems in some cases and in some countries.
Yeah, and he had only like maybe 5 goals, so to add that as
like,
one of them,
it's like his 10 commandments.
Really had to focus on that. Yeah. So to add maybe to Zade's part of also like his direction through maturity about opinions, I think for me, because I've been there, I was naive about, I was really this arrogant, inquisitive child, stand up in class and ask, and ask the teacher a question that I think he probably wouldn't be able to answer.
That I know
he has some.
he wouldn't be able
that
to
I know
answer.
he wouldn't be able to
it's
answer.
It's more
or
evil than
right?
that.
Yeah, and I think really the maturity comes from this knowledge that you shouldn't dismiss the complexity, right? Like you shouldn't just be like, maybe that it's built this way, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah.
Maybe just for me to go ahead and just completely revolt against it doesn't necessarily serve any purpose. Maybe I should rethink it or think it more thoroughly.
Being a revolutionary in general is almost never like conclusive. It almost never yields any kind of actual outcome. It's so rare when being revolutionary actually gets you to an endpoint.
It's definitely a dimension that's needed, right? Because I always think about that. I always think about the revolutionaries that really are activists and are for a certain cause, and then they're not really the ones that will have to pick things up and do the paperwork and
exactly
build.
They're the poster child.
Author, yeah, exactly, and author the civilization from the ground up. So I definitely do see that, but then it's their faces on the change.
Exactly.
So I feel like that's kind of the not to go too far on a tangent, but that's the downfall of good art. It's always that. It's always that you see the image and you think that that's what caused the change.
Yeah.
But it's necessarily just that there's some poeticism to the image. Yeah.
For a second, I thought you meant it's always their faces on the currency change. As in the actual change, the paper change. Yeah, that's what I imagined. I mean, that works too, right?
Yeah.
So that's very accurate. But let me kind of go back a bit to Zizo and ask him. Sorry, I call you Zizo. That's a bit of our informality coming out. No, Zade saw that. Yeah, let's go back to Zade and ask him.
I prefer it, to be honest.
I do as well. It's just for the audience so they don't get confused. Let's keep it a bit consistent.
All right.
Yeah. No. So I just wanted to ask you. Right, we mentioned the development of views. We already kind of started touching on it. Just to push you a bit further on that. What do you think your experiences across the different educational systems that you faced, especially after your graduation from high school, really told you or gave you insight into in general?
Yeah, well, since I graduated high school back in 2015, I've attended 4 different institutions.
Okay.
But now, I don't want to be a victim and say that I was dealt the bad cards or whatever. I do predominantly take responsibility for most of the events that forced me to change institutions. But to a certain extent also, it was kind of out of my hands. So I've been in 4 different institutions, mostly in Egypt, but also in California. And I've seen the whole spectrum, is what I'm trying to say. Like I've obviously not the whole spectrum, but I've seen a large section of the spectrum.
Could you go in through each one and kind of tell us what the lessons were? Do you have some conception of that, or is it not as explicit?
I know I can do that. I mean, so I first graduated school 2015, and here in Egypt, when you apply to public schools, it's through the Tansi program, and through Tansi, you by default apply to all the universities of the major you're applying for. By default, that's just how it works. So because I graduated with the American diploma, there was a conversion because most people in Egypt do not graduate from the American diploma. With the American diploma. So the conversion rate of my score was just a couple degrees off the cutoff mark for medicine,
Hmm.
which was unfortunate, which meant I could not attend any public university for medicine in Egypt. And that was kind of like a big blow, because the acceptance for that happens later on in the fall semester. So even if I had the backup, I wouldn't be able to attend it, because it was already halfway through. It's like a regular semester in a different university.
Hmm.
So then I went to AUC, the American University of Cairo.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did. I went for a semester.
Mhm.
And I was studying biology there. And well, it's a liberal arts college, so I wasn't expecting much. Obviously, they're not really focused on the sciences.
Mhm.
But in the short amount of time I was there, I was surprised. I mean, they have really good facilities. They have good professors and good opportunities, to be honest. So I was like A-okay with that, you know.
Mm.
But I was during that period of time, I was really getting into neuroscience, which is the study of the nervous system in general, the brain, the cortex, the spine, all that, the nerves. And I found out that one of the best institutions for studying neuroscience was in LA, and UCLA specifically. And it just so happens that my friend, Hasaballah, a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah, another one of our best friends. That's for another time, another day.
He was attending a college there.
Mm.
So I thought to myself, there's the best place to study neuroscience, and my friend's there, so it wouldn't be too hard of a transition, because I've never lived alone or by myself or anything, right? So it was a huge change. So I thought to myself that would be a good idea to go. So this was in 2016, right? So I traveled. Little did I know, I traveled in the fall of the fall of 2016 to LA, and I think it was November, so like 2 weeks into, or like 3 weeks into being there, a huge inflation happened in Egypt, which made the dollar equivalent like fourfold more than it used to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's 18 pounds.
So yeah, something like, or like at the time it was more like 22, something like that.
22, yeah.
Like in the spike of it. So that was really tough financially. I mean, LA is already expensive, and the fact that I had like multiple family members were pitching in to help me to substantiate me there, and that was just a huge burden on me, on my psyche. And plus, I was working while studying. Whether it was unfortunately I worked in Starbucks. I worked
in corporate chill.
I also worked in for Uber.
Oh.
And I worked in two Arab restaurants. So I was always working, right? I was trying to make the money to substantiate myself. Yeah, it was tough, man. And I spent 2 years there, and I really, honest to God, man, I tried my best, but it was just getting too draining, too hectic. Plus the burden, the financial burden. I didn't want my family to suffer, So I felt it was most appropriate to come back to Egypt. And lo and behold, man, like there was this new university opening up just as I was coming back, and they took me in medicine because it's a private university, so it's a different system from the public section, like the public universities. And they took me in, and that's where I've been so far, 2 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
And did you have to restart everything?
Yep, unfortunately. But it also worked to my advantage, because here's the thing: in the US, for anyone who's interested in general listening to this, if you want to be a doctor, you have to go through an entire undergraduate degree first, and
pre-med.
then take well, you don't have to specifically be pre-med, but you have to get your undergraduate degree, and it's preferable that you do pre-med.
But doesn't your undergraduate degree have to be in the sciences?
It doesn't have to, but it's preferred. It's suggested. Like, it's really rare when someone from the arts gets into medicine.
Yeah.
It's very rare.
That would be weird. Yes.
Yeah, but it's possible. Anyway, and then you take the MCAT, and then you get into medical university.
Okay.
So either way, I had spent like the 3 or 4 years of pre-med, and now I'm just in medical school. And the year I went, I got into New Giza, which is my current university. They on the national level in all of Egypt, all the medical universities converted from a 6.5 year program to a 5-year condensed program.
Okay.
So it's the same thing. Like it's almost as if I had gone to university.
That was fortunate. Yeah.
I was very fortunate. The entire thing was fortunate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just worked out for me.
Yeah. And just tell us what you learned about the different educational systems. So what was it like what was the difference in terms of, I mean, you talked a bit about AUC and how it was a pleasant surprise. The educational system was so good. But then how was it in the US? Was it as good as you imagined it would be? Was it less than you expected? Or what was it like?
Well, here's the thing. I went to a community college because this specific community college I went to was like a fast track to UCLA. Like they had a sistership program. So if you fulfill certain grades, you're guaranteed a position at UCLA, pretty much. So that's why I went to that community college. But the thing is, it was a huge community college. It was bigger than the student population of AUC, and it was smaller, and so the classes were full all the time, and you pretty much did what you want. If you wanted, like, you take whatever classes you want to take, and if you fulfill the GCs and everything, yeah, exactly, you can get your degree, or you can transfer. Most people transfer. So I like the freedom of taking whatever. I took some like any classes I want.
Yeah.
But I realized that you don't have to take a class to gain knowledge in that specific topic. Right. So it was almost like a waste of time.
Yeah, but at least you discovered that, right? I mean, I
True.
think especially because you were in such a rigid system, especially MES or shared high school, at least me for a time, that was so rigid that eventually it was just, it felt like you wanted that kind of freedom, I guess, right? And then eventually, probably when you went there, you realize, okay, well, now I have it. It's
now it's like, what do I do with it?
Yeah, the grass is always greener, right, on the other side.
Exactly. And especially because I was taking mostly science classes, like chemistry.
Yeah, by then, you knew already what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah, but in those classes, because in the US they like to separate labs from lecture kind of sessions. So we did that a lot, and the turnover rate from understanding what was said in the lecture to applying it in the labs was not always the best. Like, I feel like there should be more coinciding of theory and application. But that's a different. We'll get into that.
Yeah,
later.
we will definitely.
Yeah, but in general, I mean, all universities teach pretty much the same, man. Anywhere in the world, it's pretty much the same.
To what degree did you come to understand the value of autodidacy and just self-teaching, right? Because I think people are I mean, you've just made a very good point, which a lot of people are under the illusion doesn't hold. But really, when it comes to university, most of the education actually is, I would argue at least, self-taught. It's done by you, right? And just tell us how exactly, what your view on that is. Do you think that's true, or do you think that lectures, classes, I mean, I guess labs are a particular case where that's not necessarily true, but in terms of just the theory at least, do you agree?
Okay, well, to some extent yes, and to some extent no. I'm a huge proponent of autodidacy. I feel that you can't really learn anything unless you teach it yourself. I mean, you can learn the pathways that others have formulated, so that you can have that template for you. And that's pretty much what a lecturer does. It gives you a template, but you're never going to truly understand anything unless you want to understand it and attempt to understand it, right? So,
no, absolutely. That really reminds me even of my literature, my AP literature class in like 12th grade, and even so, we read a lot of novels in that class, a lot, like too much for one class actually, but I loved it. My teacher.
Did you read Their Eyes Were Watching God?
No.
Oh man,
you're missing out.
But we read
Neil Hurston as had our class by the balls. Really, that's the best way.
Yeah, no, we read Kafka, we read Poe, we read Tolstoy.
Nice.
I'm seeing a lack of diversity in that list.
Not really. But anyway, so so I had to write a final essay and write like a bit of what I learned from every piece of literature we've read, and I put this. I like putting quotes at the end of my essays. I don't know, But anyway, so it was won by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it's I really like him. And it says I believe it says the greatest form of education is one that is self-driven. And I feel like that's really what I've learned through this class, because it is a class and I had to read these novels. But if not for my interest, if not for my teacher, because this teacher, she used to always want us to express our own individuality through what we read. She really wanted to have. She's amazing. I love her. She's really one of my favorite teachers. And I feel like yes, Yani, you would not learn. You can learn something not wanting to learn it, just to reach some certain requirement, but to really understand something and gain some value from it that would make sense in your ever expanding web of values and your view of life, then yes, part of it has to be self-driven. Part of it has to come from some interest in you. So that would be kind of what I think about that.
And what about the other part? Do you think that teachers and lecturers are a necessary part of the education, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do for the sense that you need to at least learn the bare minimum.
Okay, so they're not.
I mean, a bad school is better than no school. Let me just put it that way.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, not alternatives. I'm not saying alternatives where you have someone who's going to teach you at home, or someone's going to teach you to read and write and give you things and give you homework, but also the things you gain from school, right? Being put in a place with people who are your age, and there's some rules that guide you, but then there are sub rules that you create together. And
the socialization aspect of it is important, but that's pretty much the extent of it.
Yeah.
But no, I believe also there's some bare minimum to it. There's some bare minimum education that perhaps is. I mean, I couldn't. I mean, I don't know really. I haven't really thought of that through. But let me just put it prematurely that way. I can't think of another system that is so different, right? That is so different than putting children together in one place and giving them some rules and some knowledge that they have to understand, and then testing them on.
Oh, but that's not
obviously. Obviously, the younger they are, they have to have more direction. That's
absolutely,
a given.
I understand. But I feel like you could. I feel like the system itself is. I don't see a different system that could be better, but I feel like every variable of that system I've just mentioned could be tweaked, right? You could have better teachers. You could have better ways of informing the knowledge you want to inform.
For sure.
Sure, but I don't see it as generalizable. You know,
I think you're being a bit unfair, because you've generalized school to mean loosely just what happens whenever you bring kids together, basically, and give them a few rules, which isn't exactly what school is. I
didn't just say that. I didn't just say that, did I?
You did, though. That was the definition.
No, I said you bring kids together, you put them in a place, and then you bring someone.
Yeah, but it's
gives them some form of knowledge.
It's totally different.
Exactly.
It's like, for example, if you compare the Montessori schools compared to the Japanese schools, compared to regular standard American schools, they're all completely different.
You're ignoring the differences in favor of some generalizable, abstracted, unspecific definition, which isn't fair, because if you're calling anything basically like that school, I mean, then obviously there is nothing that can be outside of it, right? But that's not the point, because there's huge variation within that. Within those parameters, right?
Maybe. So, but here's the thing. Maybe what's common between all schools and just all schools would be, it's a place that you go to, in which you usually meet people the same age as you, and you sit somewhere, and then there's a person that teaches you some form of knowledge, and then later on you're tested on it in some kind of way, and you go to this school periodically, almost every day. And
let me suggest something to you.
But then every single variable I've just mentioned can be tweaked. Here's my question, right? Because I'm not really defending or dismissing anything. I'm just saying, I'm not sure if there's any other structure that is better than that, that could also be tweaked on each and every variable that I've already mentioned. Obviously, some schools and some systems are better than other systems, but they all share this common platform. So my question is, could there be an absolutely different platform that could be better in terms of schooling?
Well, obviously, we can't prove a hypothetical, but what we can say is, well, first of all, the variables you were using, you meant like all the variables you mentioned: better teachers, better facilities, better, more financial support, whatever. Those are all like all good, but what about the main variable, which is the student themselves and their position within the student body? So I wanted to propose this to you. Think of a student who excels at math, right? Far beyond the years, and they don't, and that's pretty much what they have, a immensely advanced mathematical acuity, right? But they kind of lack in other aspects
okay.
of their education.
So
right?
Maybe very,
and that
high,
happens,
like,
and that happens a lot, right? So why should they be subject to staying in a specific group, predominantly age group, obviously, just because of this deficiency in something that their neurological structure will simply never support, right? Like they're just built in that way.
I feel like that's just a resource kind of argument rather than a system that negates the notion, right? Because I'm pretty sure at face value, which is, I absolutely agree with you, right? I'd rather have like 20 people dedicated to each child and their necessity. I mean,
no,
you just can't.
Not what I meant. That's not.
I'm just like hyperbole, Yani. I'm not really saying that's what you're saying, but I am saying that if that could happen, then yeah, I'd like it to happen. I'd like every child to get as much care and individual planned out kind of, I don't know, role in life as they see fit and according to their abilities and all, you know.
Well,
then it's a resource kind of.
Not really, because if you think of it, I mean, if said student, this boy or girl or whatever, had this immense, mathematical ability, they should be able to be in the higher age groups, for that specific subject, and the inverse too, for people who are lacking in specific subjects, they should be. What I'm saying pretty much is, it should not be based on a age based system. Right, like your age should not dictate what level of mastery you are in a specific discipline.
But you'd have to disentangle age-related socialization and social cues from basically capacity to consume educational content, which you can't disentangle, right? Because there is a strong correlation. And if you were to put that person who is deficient on every other dimension, let's say, except for mathematics, in the higher age group, and who is also younger than that age group, you're going to have a huge socialization issue, right? It's just going to be full-on bullying all the time, right?
We're assuming it's the same general like platform that we've been using, with the small difference being that the student will be in a higher age group for just one. It's a huge paradigm shift, is what I'm talking about.
But it's not necessarily that. What I'm assuming is more that we're going to remain the same people, and people bully, especially if they see this extremely.
Sure, but the socialization aspect, as important as it is, right? It should have no bearing on the actual education, right? It should be in tangent with it, but it should have no bearing on.
I don't even agree with that, because socialization is one of the primary functions that school serves, and I think it's one of the primary things that needs to be educated, right? And just being around
for sure. I'm not saying excluded. I'm saying that it should be in tangent with education, but it should have no bearing on one's learning process.
But education is a social enterprise in part within schools, right? It's necessarily so. Anyway, maybe Yusri can come in first.
I have a question. So, because I don't know if you thought about this, Zade. I'm not trying to put you in some corner here, but do you have a concept, a concept in your mind in which we can function at the same time? We can give students the education that they need for their individual abilities, okay, and then on the other side, give them also the necessary socialization that they need to be with their
Yes.
peers and whatnot.
Yes.
And just to keep in mind also one thing, right, is a child's some children will be, as you have said, like very gifted, let's say in mathematics, okay, but also are we factoring in the child's wants? That does he want to do math? Because that seems to always be the like, let's say, the artistic element of these situations. If you've watched, there are certain movies about that in which children are gifted in a certain thing, and then they're given an early scholarship, and they're put in situations where they can do math and do whatever they're gifted in.
Right.
But it's not necessarily that they want it, right?
Yet another Good Will Hunting reference.
Yeah.
Keep it coming.
No, but not just yeah, but yeah, that's just it, really. Like, it's not to go further. So
For sure. I mean, to answer your first, I mean, I think there's two sides to that question, and so okay, I should have premised when I proposed that situation to you, I should have premised it with the fact that I have actually been thinking about a system which is multifaceted. I mean, it's not just about specifically age group difference and
are you
socialization.
debuting it?
I mean, here's the thing.
Debuting
The
it on the
intention
Discrepancies
was exactly the opposite.
Yeah,
That's the funny thing.
I was talking to Masoud recently about the fact that this project I've been working on for the last couple of years now has been my brainchild. It's been the most thing I've been passionate about pretty much in the last couple of years. So I'm not necessarily going to speak of it, but I'll speak of the principles that I've gone through to formulate this.
Let me just come in here and say we will get into more of this, and specifically the ideas behind your principles and your general view of education. But just maybe to go back to the point that we started with here.
Okay.
So our discussion was about to what degree is school necessary, and I think Zade and I fell on the side of, well, I think the primary function is one of socialization there, right? I mean, at least currently. I didn't say that's not what it should be, but currently that's what it seems to be, right, Zade? Did I get you right?
True.
This is what we see. And then Youssef's response was that the socialization element isn't all that there is to school at the moment. I think what you said, Youssef, was that school also serves the role of providing a minimal composite of knowledge and imparting it to kids or students, right? And we were saying...
It doesn't necessarily do a good job all the time.
Yeah, but at least the minimal is kind of what is aspired to, and that's what the role of school has been so far, right? And I think we got into talking about what would be the alternative, and you seem to have lumped all forms of bringing individuals together, or kids together, with a supervision and a set of guidelines and capacity for enforcement, all in the same bag, right? You have made you have said, to be fair to you, that there are major distinctions within those parameters, but that you don't imagine any alternative to those sets of parameters as a feasible...
No, I'm not really committing. Let me also just say,
Sure.
I'm not really committing that there couldn't be any alternatives.
No, I didn't say that.
And I've even
right? That's all.
Yeah, I've even prefaced by saying that, well, I haven't really thought that through.
Okay.
And also maybe to add something else, maybe also to add something else is I'm kind of talking in a modern setting. So I'm not talking in a pure
abstract,
social behavior abstract setting, because then, well, I would love to run us down to just woke up out of a cave, in the sunrise, but no, because here's the thing. Also, people are working, and then you have this school also as a market replacement to certain things you're getting at home that you cannot really be getting right now. So I'm just saying that the way it's functioning right now is not necessarily. Yeah, well, you go ahead.
But this is where I'm very concerned. You're obfuscating on what the definition of this term is to you, because on the one hand you've generalized it sufficiently, and we're basically unable to point to anything as an alternative because it looks exactly like school, right? But those are very different things. Like, even what Zade would probably come up with would, under your extremely broad definition, be school. Does it look anything like what is currently at hand? Well, to some degree, if you define it very broadly, but now you seem to be stepping back and saying, yeah, but I'm speaking in modern terms I'm not speaking from a very abstract sense. So are you
No,
talking
but
about
not
now
also-
with
not-
market replacements
not
being
also-
school parameters, or could we also include even Hitler Youth as a form of school, right? Which is
No,
always fun to think about,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like-
No, I'm not really like backing off when I said about not back like taking a back step or whatever when I said about the modern times and whatnot.
Mm.
But I thought the discussion was really towards the idea of alternatives to school, not really how to make schooling better. You know, like an alternative. You know, like some people these like what they call
Homeschooling?
free range extremists. You guys heard about like they're
No,
like free ranging
explain
their
that.
children, as in just letting nature take its course. Yeah.
Okay, obviously that's dumb, right? Obviously
No,
that's
but I mean,
dumb.
there's some kernel of truth to it, right? I
What-
would
wait,
love my
what?
children.
I'm not signing on to that. It's like,
I'm
I've
not
already
really-
signed on to suicide is adaptive before, so fool me once, that's on you. Fool me twice. Sorry, man.
No, I'm not
That
saying
that wouldn't even work. I mean, in the Neolithic period, that would have to be
I'm not
pre-Neolithic.
saying-
I mean.
Not even in the Neolithic period.
Yeah, so that's some so there's this extreme approach. Well, who's Jonathan Haidt co-authored a book called Free Range Children. And yeah, but it's very interesting, right? Because it doesn't make this extremist free ranging rationale of just let your children be.
Yeah. It's just free range as opposed to a helicopter mommy, right?
Yeah, it's just that children happen to if let for their own being with the minimal amount of security and supervision around them. Exactly, they actually create games within themselves and some form of like. Quasi-judicial systems in which they can.
But is that
Yeah.
school?
That's what I'm saying.
wonder.
Some people actually argue for that, and I've heard that for that.
Can I riff on
complete
that for a second?
to the extreme? What?
Can I riff on that for a second? What you're just talking about?
Yeah,
So
sure.
so you just brought up the other extreme of the spectrum. So the
No, some other option that people. I'm not saying there are only these two extremes, right? I'm not saying there's this.
let's say it's linear. Let's
there
say
are different
Hitler
models.
Youth
I know,
and,
but let's-
Hitler Youth and free range
exactly.
schools.
Let's just say
Those
it's
are the
linear,
two
right? Even though it's not.
extremes. Yeah.
Right?
No,
So
it's not.
one-
It's absolutely not.
Yeah, but let's just for
Yeah.
simplification, right?
Yeah.
So let's say
One
on
dimension.
on one side it's the free range or the Hitler Youth or whatever. Actually, sorry, the Hitler Youth would be on the other side. It would be
It's
the
on the other side,
extremely.
yeah. So those are the two poles.
Exactly, the
Yeah,
extremely
let's say.
indoctrinated and the free range, non-trajectory, non-direct.
a better one even would be the free range and the Chinese system right now with
Sure.
their micro
facial recognition system.
like microfacial recognition.
They have a credit system.
Yeah,
Now. Like
a
you have
credit system. Yeah, let's say this and that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Let's move. Go on.
Anyway, so two sides of the spectrum, right? Now, just logically speaking, right? In any spectrum, you almost always want to shoot for the middle. You almost never want the extremes.
It's the
right?
fractal truth.
I wouldn't agree.
Not
I'm
from
saying
a golden
predominantly,
ratio.
Mac, not always. I'm saying predominantly.
Well, I think Max disagreement would be like from this kind of golden ratio fallacy thing
oh my
where
god.
if I'm kind of
No,
wrong,
it's
you're
not
kind of
even that.
wrong, so the middle might be
No,
right.
It's not even that. It's more like it depends on the circumstances. I think the degree to which you can afford free range children is subject to the environment and circumstance of your time. The fact that we live in a world, especially in the West, where it would be safe enough to have free range children, that is a function of capitalism, of a lot of the benefits that we have today. But it wouldn't have necessarily been the best, but it could be the best now, right? But it wouldn't have been the best, for example, in the Neolithic age, as you mentioned, right?
Sure, but
Like,
we're talking about right
you
now,
just get
right? So the entire spectrum exists within this time frame, right? It's not just like subject to.
Well, I think Ahmed's also point even to the argument of right now, but this is also kind of a fundamental point rather than a necessarily contextual to what we're saying is
yes,
even though the two temperaments exist, right, and they must together in some synchronized duality must have at some point negotiated at some point in the back, like in times back where they could have the two extremes. We should really go for the middle because things have stayed the same for so long that right now even our even though both temperaments have not really evolved out of their shells and they still exist the same way they are, we must not necessarily shoot in the middle of both ends of the spectrum. That he's saying
well,
that
not
maybe,
necessarily the exact mean middle, but, I mean,
Sure,
no,
sure. There is gonna be some sort of. I'm more just.
Well, it's definitely
in
it's definitely
favor
it's
of
going to be
let's have
skewed
a-
towards one direction more than the other.
it's
Well,
definitely gonna be, but it's definitely
okay.
gonna be also predominantly towards the center rather
Yeah,
than
I mean
either extreme.
Right.
What I am saying is that let's not assume the answer because our current circumstance is so novel that we can afford to experiment with things on either extreme. I wouldn't go the extreme of Hitler Youth at the moment. That's just a personal preference, though. But in general, I think we should be more bold and audacious with experimenting, like with things like free range eggs and children. Those are both very good things, I think. But yeah, all I'm saying is that I think we should be more audacious and more bold in experimenting with the extremes.
For sure.
Because we live in such extreme times.
Exactly.
See, so extreme times call for extreme change. I
And
would
not
say.
just that, the status quo has been the same for so long.
Yeah.
It is bound to change anyway, right? And we need to change it. So might as
Yeah.
well look into changing it. Look into finding out what are the most empirical,
novel
and
interesting.
empirical ways of
Yeah.
accomplishing this.
Sure. Now let's try and get you back on your train of thought, Zade, because you were saying whenever you have a spectrum, you're trying to shoot in the middle. What was the next thing you were going to say? I think now we've hashed that out.
Well, I was gonna answer Yusri's first question. I mean, back I think it was about 10 minutes ago, when he asked.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, man.
He asked like what I would propose, or what would be the alternative. I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
So I was saying that I have a set of principles that I've based the project I've spoken of before on, and I can talk about the principles because those are just things I hold true to myself. So I can talk on that for a while. So
Definitely, yeah.
I think there's about 5 or 6 key principles that I believe are absolutely necessary for education and that are lacking in the current education industrial system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just kind of reference them in general first, and then we can get into detail of each one if you guys like.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right. So first would be mastery, the ability to master something. Number 2 is open access. Number 3 would be connectedness or interlinking. Number 4 would be historical context. I know that wasn't really what somewhat like most would expect, but that is to me very important. We'll get into that. 5 would be discussions, forums, like dialogue in general about the content one is learning. And then perpetual information updating. That this one specifically is very important to me. And testing and other things about like extraneous properties like testing, preparedness, real world applications, improvisation, etc. So yeah, we can talk about any of those if you want.
Yeah. First of all, just to lay things out, maybe just give us a bit more insight into each of those as definitions, how you define them, an example, maybe.
Okay. So when it comes to mastery, for example, I believe that there's this succession of information, right? Like you have to learn the basics, the fundamentals in order to get to the higher levels, right? You can't just know the higher levels. You can't just understand them. You have to know the foundations of it. Like you have to have the foundation of a building so that you can build upwards, right?
Yeah,
preferably.
It's cumulative.
I'm not sure if I'm sorry to interject, but like I'm not sure if you have to. I mean, a good example of that would be me in my pre-calc class, right? Because I sure can solve certain equations. I have no idea how this formula has been built up.
Sure,
No
exactly.
idea the fundamentals of. But here's the thing: you give me this equation, and I can solve it. I can give you a result. So there is some value to that as well. But then I don't really understand it from the ground up. So preferably, I don't see that necessarily so that you have to know in order to gain some at least value from what you'd gain from the higher levels of knowledge.
For sure, man. I'm not really proposing that everyone be extremely proficient in every single discipline or topic that they have to go through in the succession of information. Obviously, that would be impossible to do, right?
I don't even think that Youssef's point is at cross purposes with yours, because in a way, what Zade is saying is that it is a necessary condition for mastery for you to have gotten through the bottom.
I thought Zade was just setting it down Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah,
I get you.
I mean, obviously, that would be impossible, right? If you had to learn all of algebra to get to all of pre-calculus, to get to all of calculus, to get to all of
no,
it would be impossible.
Mathematics, especially, does not work like that at all.
Exactly. What I meant by mastery is the capacity to fulfill what is required of you as an individual with that information. So let's stick with the math, for example.
So this is mastery, or is this just proficiency? You said proficiency is kind of a precondition for mastery, right?
Yes. Well,
so
what I mean,
what you described, or proficiency?
I guess you can call it proficiency, but I deem it mastery because it's to varying degrees. So if I am a mathematician, then I will have to master it. You know what I mean? But if I'm simply a businessman, I will have to master whatever is required of me. Right? Proficiency would be proficiency. Let's say is like 90%. Mastery would be 100%. Sure. You have to know exactly what is required of you.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking. Yeah,
that can only come through succession, like proper succession of information.
Yeah,
right.
I would agree through that. More or less.
So
in some cases, though, we need to admit that there is no proper succession, right? So sometimes learning linear algebra is just as good as learning vector calculus next, and it can go either way. But yeah,
Ahmed, I can absolutely tell you no one understands what you just said.
Right, but those math can be categorized into like those two let's say sub-disciplines could be categorized into a general section, which let's say called level 2, for example, right? Anything in level 2 would be you'd have to master it to get to level 3, right? No matter what.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And you can have like branches where you'd need to get linear algebra to unlock these branches, but not the other branches. Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree with that. No, go on. Sorry.
And here's the thing, and I mean throughout history, this whole like there's always been the master apprentice kind of dynamic, right? There's always been the master who has fully succeeded in formulating their own vision of whatever. Like they've mastered the content and they've even formulated their own vision. They're riffing off it, right? They're improvising off of that. And now they're teaching what they have, a template, to their apprentice. This has been how it's been since the dawn of time, and it still continues till today.
It's beautiful.
In Germany, for example, in the German education system, many of the vocational and even non-vocational jobs, vocation as in like EMS or plumbing, craft, exactly. So many of those occupations, being vocational or not vocational, still go under the master apprentice system dynamic. Like you are assigned, or you find your own master, not master obviously, but like mentor. Now it's called mentor. It used to be called master, and apprentice, right? And that's
a very human thing in
general. It's a very human thing, and it's always been, because that's just how it's been. That's how we've learned. That's how we've evolved.
And do you want to go on? Or should
just one last thing about mastery. So here's the thing: when it comes to the current educational system in general, it seems as though that's not the priority. In fact, not even priority. It's not even like a
goal.
It's not even a goal, right? The goal of education in general en masse is to produce the quotas required to fulfill the financial obligations, or whatever you want to call it, of an institution, right? Let's not sugarcoat it. That's pretty much the main objective, right?
Sure.
So mastery of success.
Sure, but what is? Yeah, Mo. That's
wait. Let's wait.
Go ahead.
Wait, what were you saying?
No, go ahead. All
right, so
you finish and then we'll go.
I mean, okay, obviously that might have been too reductionist, but you get the point, right? Like the point is they're not focused on mastery of specific succession for said individuals in whatever levels required for each individual, in order to have the best tools required to succeed in life. That's not their goal, right? They don't even have a system towards applying that.
How do you measure success, though?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, this is like it's a hot topic in generally. Some people would, I guess, you guys would say that IQ and psychometric testing would be.
I mean, not necessarily.
I mean, an early going at least. I know, not necessarily, but like it's like it's most definitely indicative of something, right?
Zade, you just said,
how
I don't want to reduce. You just said, I don't want to reduce. This is like, you've reduced us to these eugenicists trying to
That's not what I meant.
Psychometrically.
What I meant was, I mean, especially psychometrics, they're very indicative. I mean, they're pretty much
to some degree,
absolutely
the poster child of psychology, of modern psychology today. Right.
Yeah, we can agree on that, definitely.
Yeah.
So
best established.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's very indicative. Obviously, you can also say by economic standards, like the average income or whatever. All those specific indices that they use to measure success. But that's not the thing.
No,
I don't care about material success. What I care about is memory retention and application of knowledge. To me, that's what success is, right? I don't really have.
No, but I agree to an extent, but like also, here's the thing. I believe all success does have a personal aspect to it. I mean,
for sure.
Someone who's filthy rich and has everything that they want, but they sleep 2 hours a day, and they have a terrible relationship with their family and friends, and they're just generally miserable. I don't believe that's a successful person. Well, I mean, you could just say that's a successful. He has a successful career. I wouldn't say that's a successful.
Exactly.
Person.
I was actually about to.
Okay. So, but also, can we go back to the part of the incentive, the economic incentive?
Yeah,
part?
That's what I was actually going to bring up as well. You and I both were thinking.
I just
want
to ask this question.
Okay.
Right? What's the alternative?
What's the what?
What's the alternative?
Can I make it more specific?
Okay.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
So, you mentioned, Zade, at some point when Yusri and I almost interrupted you simultaneously. Right? You mentioned that what is being concerned, what schools are concerned by mainly is satisfying financial quotas of some sort, right? And it's not mastery. Whatever it is, it's not mastery.
Exactly.
And it has more to do with finance than with actual education.
Finance,
knowledge,
reputation,
right?
grants, whatever, all that.
Sure. But we are asking essentially, obviously school is operating within a resource-constrained environment. Always. Everything is operating within a resource-constrained environment. That's trivial to admit, right?
Sure.
So given that, and given the fact that one of the ways to maintain the resources coming in is by maintaining the financial quotas, reputation, etc., what is the system that you are offering that can make sure those at least are met, while also granting all the students and all the people who are learning under this system the maximal or the most optimal, let's say, level of understanding and mastery? And keep in mind, we are having here a trade-off between fitness within the system, fitness within, let's say, the quote-unquote capitalist system, and truth, which is what you want, this is essentially what you want, or education, which is kind of what you want to be the utmost value, but it's being embedded within a resource-constrained environment, making everything else more prime, right?
Sure.
So what is the alternative is the question, right? There's economics, right? We have to talk about that.
Sure. I'd say the first step of this, and this has to do also with if it wasn't obvious before, I'm trying to create a computer program or a website, which kind of optimizes all these properties I spoke of earlier, but none of that would mean anything without the unification of information. That is the main premise of education. If you have to eliminate discrepancies, right? If you look throughout all of education in general, through textbooks, through methods of teaching, and all that, there are so many discrepancies. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Explain what you mean by that again.
Discrepancies, as in like contradictions in specific pieces of information. Right? Like, let's say one textbook says that, and they're not necessarily like unscientific or unempirical claims. They're just contradictory in maybe in the style of the way they say it, or contradictory in the implications of the right. So there's different types of discrepancies, and and they're everywhere throughout all textbooks.
Can I just interject
Sure.
here with a quote by Eric Weinstein where he goes, "The real world can often be found in the narrativized world's failure to close." And essentially, when I'm considering this quote and what I'm hearing from you is an argument about the unification of knowledge and the unity of knowledge, right? Your argument is, well, why on earth do we have these siloed departments, siloed disciplines that are speaking into an echo chamber without any reference to each other and making it seem to the lost individual or the young student who is trying to learn all these things like there is no immediate connection between biology and physics. Actually, what I'm learning in physics seems to completely contradict biology, because in physics, I'm learning about entropy, and in biology, I'm learning that actually the energy within a system is precisely what is the maintenance of energy within a system coming in is exactly what's required to have evolution. Is that a contradiction? No one ever resolves that for
exactly.
me.
But
right?
that's a highly
you
that's
can
a highly
resolve it really
intricate,
easily.
Discrepancy. I'm talking about the baseline discrepancies, Masood. Like
Okay,
things that
so
are
go
that
on.
are so baseline that it's just like as.
Give me an example.
Okay, well here's the thing. I'm part of this organization called the IFMSA. It's the largest and the longest student-run organization in the world. It's pretty much the syndicate for medical students.
Wow.
And so my position is that of the medical education coordinator, if you want to call it that, here in Egypt.
Okay.
So one of the campaigns I started is called actually Eliminate Discrepancies. And I asked for students, and this was just an open platform. Like I made a Google Sheets document,
That's really good.
with columns for the quote. I'll explain how it goes. So there is an abundance of these informational discrepancies within textbooks, within lectures, whatever, right? So I wanted to unify it, at least within a university or within a country's educational system. So I put this up, and I asked people to put quotes of a statement, whether it's from a lecture or from a textbook, even, or whatever, and with the page number or the reference or the citation, and the whatever statement they found somewhere else, which is directly contradictory or relatively contradictory, right, to that statement.
Yeah.
And we just collected for it. And it turns out there's so much of it that it's outrageous. I mean, the fact that it's the burden of the student, like, being required to sift through all this and connect the dots and find the actual truth value of all these varying contradictory statements. It's ridiculous.
But can I just?
And that was just baseline, right? You were talking about the interdisciplinary. That happens too. So everything from the baseline all the way to the interdisciplinary, really intricate discrepancies. It's vehement. It's everywhere, right?
Yeah, I get that. And I just wanted to ask, so when you investigated these seeming contradictions, were they all actual contradictions? Was it like just from the word, was it a contradiction? So, or was it just a matter of a student not paying enough attention?
Sometimes it was.
Therefore
obviously, there's human error in any endeavor, right? But
sure.
But
other times it was actual,
the vast majority
straight up
of it
contradictions
was just
between
literal contradictions
within the same books or
within the
different
same books, within
or...
the same lectures.
Okay.
For example, in my university, we have lectures both for lecture purpose and lectures for section or like lab purposes, right? So for example, we'd have like a lecture about hemoglobinopathies, which are pretty much the pathologies of the blood hemoglobin, right?
Yeah.
And then we have lab on it, right? And there'd be direct contradictory evidence when it comes to, for example, thalassemias, right? Thalassemias are pretty much the morphological disorder of hemoglobin, right? There's alpha and beta thalassemias. So there'd be and this is just something that came off the top of my head because this was the first time I found such a stark contrast between the lab and the lecture, and it was infuriating. Like, is it on me to go and look into this very specific piece of information and research for hours on end, which is what I did, by the way, to find the actual answer?
Yeah,
okay,
but was
how,
it easy to find the answer?
And also, how often does it happen?
A lot. At
No,
least
okay,
at least
a
in medicine.
lot,
In medicine, because
in the abstract, a lot. I agree.
Okay.
But also in relation to let's say like there's a 1,000-page book.
Units of information. Yeah.
How
for example,
many
a million
of these?
units of information?
Because that happens in law school like a lot, right? Like
Exactly.
my lecture PowerPoints and my like what is it called, tutorial PowerPoints. They're usually
self-contradictory.
no, sometimes they're just saying completely different things.
Exactly,
Okay.
right? So it's
But then
go on.
there's also the human error factor, but and then
All right,
I
exactly.
feel like they're all under the human
Exactly. So
factor.
the fact, even let's just say that, like, for all intents and purposes, that they are under human error, right? Fine, that's all.
Can we just explain human error? Because are you
in a general
thinking
sense,
of it?
in a general
but
sense that a human got it wrong?
Can I just?
Yeah.
Are you thinking of it the way I am thinking of human error, which is not just, oh, I made a mistake or a typo or whatever, or I just didn't understand this, but also the limitations on our capacity to understand the world as well, right?
Yeah.
Because let me tell you what problem I have with this line of thought. Obviously, there are clear-cut cases where all it would take is a simple Google search to find it on the first page, right, and to find the correct answer on the first page. But there are other instances, I mean, like the ones I mentioned, but even if you look within physics, anyone who was studying physics, who was taking both a classical mechanics class and a general relativity class, and even, let's say, throw in quantum mechanics class as well, would find them all to be contradictory. They all seem like they have nothing to do with each other, right? And the only time you ever find anything close to a reconciliation was general relativity and classical mechanics. You find that Newton is recovered as a more general form by Einstein, and then you find that quantum mechanics and general relativity, we still haven't figured out how they reconcile at all. And so, to some degree, this is just what apes do, right? We just fail to understand the world, even though the world is a one thing.
But I don't think that's what Zade means when he's right. No.
I mean, obviously, that's not what I was thinking of on the baseline, but actually, it still works into what I'm talking about. So you're talking about human error in the scientific method,
broadest sense, in the broadest sense,
exactly,
right.
which is everything from the baseline to what you're talking about, to the fact that we have limited capacities to even comprehend or apply these bits of information, if you want to call them that, right? So here's the thing: if you look at the general spectrum, let's say on the baseline discrepancies, like the ones we were talking about
Google
earlier,
search
exactly,
ones.
Those are simply human error due to carelessness,
maybe.
exactly. And then the more intricate the discrepancies are, the more they tend to be a result of deficiency of being human, right? The deficiency of our cortical systems, right?
Brushing up against the true limitations of this human prefrontal cortex.
Exactly.
Right.
But here's the thing. I mean, to some extent, we can completely eliminate this, right? If we unify the amount of information that we can unify, without taking into account all the major contradictory paradigms of different disciplines, like you said, when it comes to biology and physics, for example, right?
But honestly, no, I don't think we can eliminate it. I mean, only in a universe of infinite capacity. But like,
you can eliminate this to a certain extent, the simple forms of it, at least, right? Like you wouldn't need to have the quick Google search, quote unquote, right, to find this information. It should just be established, right? It should be a standard. Just like there's
but isn't it eliminated to a big degree?
No, it's not actually. It's really not useful. Like, here's the thing.
Well, can you like, is there like any historical context to this? Because I'm pretty sure it must have been increasingly difficult before the internet. I'm pretty sure
it was, and everyone thought that the internet would fix these ailments, but it didn't.
It didn't at all.
No, it did, obviously, to an extent, but it didn't. I mean, you'd imagine, at least, let's say you were like born in, I don't know, the 1900s, right? You'd imagine by now, especially if you were aware of the internet, that we would have surpassed this deficiency of basic human error, not even the advanced human error, the basic human error.
Can I suggest something? Because as I see it, there are two there are at least two, and I would say two primarily, different types of errors here, or different types of these problems.
Right.
One is, I mean, both of them can be attributed to even carelessness to some
Yeah.
degree. One of them is just a matter of the fact that departments have resource caps, and you have to kind of decide where you draw the line between physics and biology and chemistry in a very straightforward manner, or even within biology between, let's say, neuroscience and endocrinology, or whatever you're going to have, right? You're going to have to draw the line somewhere.
Right.
And so where you draw the line, there's going to be a very ugly, badly drawn line.
But sometimes,
right? It's going to be a
sometimes that's not the
squiggle or
case.
something.
Now, here's the thing: you're thinking of it from the like you said, departments and
Well,
like
that's one
institutional
case.
level. I'm not
That's
even
one
talking
case,
institutional
right?
level. I'm talking about a
Sure.
general humanist ideology, a humanist endeavor. For example, I'll give you an example. This doesn't necessarily have to do with education, but it has to do with standardization. So there's this organization called IUPAC. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. IUPAC is
No, tell me about
the main it's the main chemistry organization in the world, and they have set the standards for all the main. I think there's like 7 main units in all of science and scientific method, right? And all other units are derived from those 7, right? So they have set the standards. For example, that the gram is specifically this amount of units of matter.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
I think it was Antoine Lavoisier who established this, and it's been maintained until now. Actually, very recently they changed the
Okay.
kilogram, I think.
Yeah, they changed it to that ball.
Yeah, something like that. But those kind of
stored somewhere.
instances are very rare. Like since the IUPAC was established, this standardization of specific units, let's say the main unit of all life and nature, were established, and no one had any qualms with that, right? It just worked. There was no issue with that. And the one time there was an issue, like the whole gram kilogram debacle, they changed it and they made it, and it was based on the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
So that's completely fair enough. I mean, and no one had any qualms with that.
Yeah.
That's pure standardization.
Usually these things happen because it's just more convenient, actually. Right? These
Right,
happen.
exactly. So when you eliminate discrepancies, you make life more convenient. You make information more convenient, more coherent.
Sometimes. But sometimes you also increase the cost of absorbing the information, right? Because if I have to be, I understand the importance and the value of removing simple discrepancies where you can do it, but I also question the degree to which those play the largest proportion, or play the role of the largest proportion of these errors. I think more of these errors, especially as you go into university textbooks, if you're talking about lectures, they are more due to constraints on just, okay, I have to draw the line somewhere. I just have to. And it's going to look ugly no matter where I draw it, but this is where I've decided to draw it. And if you're really interested in learning more, go ahead and go read a deeper book, or go read more into it, or figure it out.
Sure, that's fine.
And I don't necessarily even think
here's
that's
the thing,
a bad
like, I don't
thing.
think we're at odds. I think we're actually saying the same thing. But here's what I'm saying. I mean, I like to reply to that. What I'm saying is, let's say that scenario did happen, and someone was very inquisitive and they wanted to know more about said topic, right? And the professor or teacher or whatever told them they should read these books to get a more deeper insight into said topic. That's all and well, so long as the base the base premise or topic they were talking about was the standard, right? Like you can't say, for example, when you're studying like the phylogeny of life, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, that is not the most succinct, let's say, the most.
It's literally the least succinct thing in biology.
Exactly.
It's like the whole thing.
Exactly. But there is lots of insight you can gain from it, from specific avenues that you try to explore within the phylogeny of life, right?
Yeah.
So you could say that the baseline, which is a common ancestor, for example, the common ancestor, that should just be standard, right? Now, obviously, I'm being very reductionist,
Sure.
but I just want to get my point across, right? There should be
Yeah.
a common ancestor, and there should be. I think 3 kingdoms, right? Archaea, Eukarya,
Yeah.
etc. So that should just be standard, right? A common ancestor, 3 kingdoms, and then everything else from after that is up to.
I'm really
up
hoping
to,
this doesn't turn political.
No. It's not political at all. Actually, here's the thing. I'm
No, I mean, I'm not saying you're gonna turn it political. I'm saying just I hope someone really doesn't turn.
But that's the danger of it.
Yeah.
That's the danger. Because what I'm speaking is what I'm saying is what most people are thinking most of the time. By the way, I'm not saying anything that's so insightful and so deep that no one's ever thought of it. No, I'm not saying anything revolutionary. Right? This is what most people are thinking about. Here's the thing about the educational industrial complex in general. Right? It is one of the most, if not the most, industry in the world that has been least challenged throughout its history, right? And scrutinized or criticized in any way. I mean, you talk about
that's actually
exactly. Like you talk,
that's very interesting.
If you talk about, for example, the oil industry, the heavy metals, big pharma, military industrial complex, all of them have been vehemently attacked and criticized and scrutinized, and even people have attempted to bring them down, to take them down completely. Right? Yeah. No one ever talks ever, and I challenge you right now to go on Google and find any like anti-education books, anti-education industry books. Right? You will not find a single one.
What do you mean by
anti-schooling?
Not even
anti-education.
Not anti-education. I meant the education industrial complex.
What is that though to you? Do you? I mean, we can find a lot of those kinds of critiques within Marxism, but they're usually oriented towards the way education is under capitalism.
But also, you find a lot of attacks on the student debt problem, for example.
Exactly. Things that are extraneous to the educational process.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual educational process, there is absolutely no scrutiny. There is no criticism.
Okay. Can I just we bring it back to the because I have a link in my head here. So,
okay.
Sure. Mastery. At what level in one's educational journey should he necessarily start to master something? Because here's my question, just to show you what I'm relating to. Because here's, for example, my problem with the study of law. Okay, so I don't see the study of law without the study of economics. It just does not actually make sense to me.
Right.
And that's, for example, the premise of what are they called? The liberal arts colleges, right? It's the idea that of like you have to be interdisciplined, or like you have to have interdisciplinary knowledge in order to have a bigger picture,
right.
Which I think is taken maybe too far to the other side. But here's my idea of mastery: is that maybe the problems that happen within physics departments or biology departments or all of these departments is that there's such a high level of mastery of one subject that all other subjects are usually, I'm not saying always, of course, but are usually dismissed. And that's why, for example, I'm asking about mastery, because what if you started mastery at a very young age?
Or a very late age too.
Oh, I agree. At a very late age, you stay a child, right? Because the entire idea of mastery is that you are willing to dismiss all other fields of knowledge in order to gain mastery in one, because that is what you believe. Maybe if we're just going to talk about it in a social way, in an evolutionary way, is that's the way you can, let's say, just benefit your community, your society, have children, bear children, all that.
Sure.
Okay, so
let me just add that there is some assumption we're bringing in here, which is that I think we're taking for granted, actually, which is that the cost of mastery has increased as time has gone by, just by virtue of the amount we have learned, right? So it was far more possible in the 1600s to be a polymath than it is today.
Sure.
To be a polymath and a master, right? To be both, right? To be a master of multiple domains rather than just a jack of all trades.
Right? Da Vinci.
Yeah, I mean, you had Da Vinci, exactly. Newton, even Einstein dabbled in the liberal arts way, alongside his physics, right? And he wrote philosophy. And so it's just that now the cost is so high, and so you really do have to commit relatively earlier in order to make to get to the same level that the person would have been at a few years ago relative to their discipline, right? And so we're taking this for granted a bit, and I was wondering, like, okay, well, now obviously the reason why you're having fewer polymaths, and we should expect us to have fewer and fewer and fewer polymaths unless we really level up on how quickly people can get to mastery, right? Obviously the reason is partially because we just know more.
But
so
it's
how
not
do
just
we
that
get
though. It's not just
quicker to mastery is also a question, I think.
But here's the thing, like it's not just about the extent of knowledge we have. I think you watched the Portal podcast with what's his boss's name? The Peter Thiel, I think.
Yeah, Peter
Yeah.
Thiel.
He was talking about he said that that polymaths are systemically being discouraged from even acknowledging or publicizing their
Who's being discouraged?
they're in the
Polymaths.
polymaths.
Okay.
Right, the people who have multiple interests, multiple
Specialties.
specialties, activities in life, you know. So he says they're being actively discouraged in their specific industries or occupations, simply because it gives off the impression that these people are not trying hard enough. They're not serious enough about their
domain.
discipline.
Yeah.
It's too much distortion as well, because I mean, imagine being in a physics department and someone who's a polymath who's coming in, he's just really trying to tie things together, and you're just really delving deep into the mastered subject you're in. So I really do see that. I mean, that's really my problem with with education in general, really, like especially personally, because I go to uni and the study of law is so boring, right? It's like it has potential to be so much more than what it is, but then and then I don't even see it, right? And I don't even see it without economics, for example. I just don't see it. That's one thing, like, because we had this, I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but we had this professor come to our university who's really the father of modern economics and law. He has this institute in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken, either Berlin or somewhere in Europe. And he's so smart and he's so open. And to hear him speak about law and economics, because, you know, when people study law, they study law in this in this bubble that law is outside of everything. It's not linked to anything. You know, even when you study, even the most law philosophers you'd study, legal philosophers you study are how do I put this out? Like they give you the study of this black letter law, that the law is excluded from everything that's around it.
It's just an inherent, like, universal morality. Don't question.
Yeah, it's so weird. No, it's not about don't question it. It's about we're not really
Contextualizing.
we're not in the service of questioning it.
We just follow.
You know, and I don't. And the thing is about here is that this is beside the topic of mastery, is that this doesn't add anything to the mastery. That's what I see. That sometimes it actually doesn't add to the mastery, even of the specific topic. And I believe that some interlinking, is necessary for even a deeper look into a certain subject. And I think that we overlook that. And I think we always overlook that.
Most definitely.
I don't think it's sufficient to say that, though, because...
Okay, why?
So I think something that we've missed out on discussing is interdisciplinarity and the mentality of scarcity and the culture of scarcity. I think I have this hypothesis, which I get really from my understanding of how the 20th century worked, or the 20th century worked with respect to science, and how what you're observing in computer science is somewhat analogous to what we had with the hard sciences back then. Because in the 20th century, what you had was a lot more of this collaboration. Physicists, chemists, mathematicians, philosophers, even biologists, right? They were all in constant dialogue with each other. And it isn't just that I imagined this, it was actually true. You saw different disciplines bringing things together. I mean, Einstein was constantly delving into mathematics to get more out of it. He had ideas from philosophy as well brought in, right? And then the chemists and the physicists were working hand in hand. This was the picture of the 20th century.
But are you sure of that?
Yeah.
Because
the picture of the 20th century was
maybe
consistent and constant collaboration.
Ahmed, maybe just answer that question as you go, because here's the thing: people might have done that, and great things might have come out of it, and that's why it's highlighted to you as a person of the future, as you speak now, as a person of the present, rather. Okay, but is it really this case? Because, well, yeah, Einstein is known, Newton is known.
Not just
Sure.
Einstein, though. I mean,
But-
there are chemists and physicists who were consistently in collaboration. There were discussions across these communities at all times, and it was partially a result. And even you can see it even by the spread of ideas from one field to another at the time. So when a breakthrough would happen in one field, it would straight go into another. I mean, quantum mechanics opened up so many different avenues in chemistry, right? And it was adopted almost immediately, but by comparison, right? There were just so many different innovations that happened and were transmitted to different fields directly. And my point here is that I think this is attributable mainly to the fact that there was a culture of abundance in science at the time, mainly by virtue of the world wars, because at the time you had a lot of funding going into science. And I think interdisciplinarity, a willingness to play with ideas, to explore different things in the hopes of getting some of these intersectional inputs that then produce transcendence of the current paradigm, that was encouraged. And it was not just encouraged, but it was even the norm, right? I mean, Feynman was constantly making contributions to chemistry by virtue of his understanding of quantum electrodynamics. You can list the names, and obviously we're still at the beginning of this current era. But perhaps where I really see the distinction at the moment between science back then and science now is when I look at the difference between computer science and, as you might want to say, the other sciences, right? Biology, chemistry, physics. In computer science, what you have is a jolly attitude that is almost supremely happy to enter into any other field, right? To go into economics and figure out what game theory has to offer it, right? And this has been done for a while now. To go into neuroscience and see what it can learn from it with respect to AI and general artificial intelligence. To go into physics and see what can be done in terms of speeding up the processing power of computers. And this is just, I think, part of the reason this is the case, part of the reason you're getting so much ingenuity and cross-departmental interaction in the case of computer science, but a bit less and significantly less, I would argue, in the case of biology today and physics today, is a function of the funding system, right? The fact is that far fewer resources are being channeled into, let's say, biology, physics, relative to what was channeled at the time of the world wars, and a lot more is being channeled into computer science, mainly because it's just extremely lucrative at the moment, right? And I don't know what you guys have to make of this. I don't know if you agree, but I think that part of the problem with requiring people to be interdisciplinary is that at a time of scarcity, no one wants to hear it, because you can't afford to, quote-unquote, waste resources. Interdisciplinary work is high risk, high reward potentially, I would argue, because, well, you're delving into a completely new territory, which isn't necessarily going to be fruitful because you have to spend so much time just learning the prerequisite. There's a high cost of entry to the new field. So you just prefer to stick with what you have because you have very few resources, and as a scientist, you just want to publish or you perish. Right? And that's kind of my take on this, and this brings us mainly to the discussion that I think Youssef and I and you, Zade, as well, have had about progress in science and stagnation in science.
There's definitely a stagnation.
Just I'll shut up now and let you guys play around with those ideas. Tell me what you think.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you kept talking for that long because my phone actually closed and I had to re-access our our Zoom call. So I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah. Just it's the easiest thing to do. Just let Ahmed go.
Just let me talk. Yeah,
He
and
just
I'll have this whole podcast be my voice.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Yes, the let's say the industry constraints when it comes to specifically in STEM, right? Like the need to always publish, the need to always be so specialized and always have the citations and having your H score high, whether it's called the H index or the H score.
H index, right? Yeah, H index,
and all that.
Did you hear, by the way, my part about comparison with 20th century. Yeah, you heard that, right? And the
Yeah,
abundance
yeah.
there. Because okay,
Obviously,
sorry.
that plays
go
a
on.
huge role in it, right? But from the neurological perspective, we are not wired to be so hyper focused on one, not just one discipline, but like one, like tunnel vision, like train of thought. We're just not. We're not wired. We're not wired in that way. Here's the thing: if you look at the general neurotypical spectrum of people who are like of regular neurological composition, most of them function within, when it comes to memory retention or learning or etc. It's very multifactorial. It's never linear.
Sure.
But and the anomalies to this are those individuals who are not neurotypical, those who have, for example, autism, and those sorts of neurological deficits. Those are the anomalies, right? And those are the people who are most adept at being hyper focused in very specific fields or.
So we're not evolved to play one game.
Exactly. And the anomalies of that prove that, right? The anomalies of that neurological composition prove that, because those who are most adept at being hyper focused also so happen to be, or most of it, like a lot of the time, I shouldn't say all obviously I shouldn't be like absolute, but a lot of the time they're somewhere on the spectrum, right? They have some form of neurological deficit. Whether it is,
I mean, that's very interesting to me, because let's say in neuroatypical people, especially people with autism, they kind of express this altered state of consciousness, or let's say just an atypical state of consciousness than what we really kind of would
encounter.
Encounter, and that really kind of interests me in relation to, I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent, but that kind of interests me in relation to what is it the limitations of our, so I think like our consciousness is necessarily structured by the limitations of our biology to an extent, and it really just interests me in relation to psychedelics and how psychedelics kind of freeze you of
so
these,
this is when we're dropping the
I have a bone to pick with you guys about regarding this. You guys talked on the first podcast about the process. You guys didn't even mention the origins of the process, man. That was disappointing. That was disappointing.
I mean,
we really want to continue doing this,
guys. So we're gonna end the podcast now.
No. So what I'm really saying is that I can really see the whole the difference in which the complexity or the limitations on your hardware can cause this altered state of, let's say, heightness, whether it be your consciousness in general. While having other deficiencies in other places. I mean, you should see people on DMT trying to swim. I mean, it's not really a good idea.
It's not really what you're supposed to do.
So
may I ask here? So you mentioned that we are generalists. Yeah, I think we all kind of buy into that. Yeah, we're the greatest of all generalists in terms of just as at a species level, right? And I think we owe this mainly to what Brett Weinstein, the other guy's brother, calls the offsetting. We owe it to what he calls basically the software hardware distinction in humans, and basically his argument is that we offset so much of our wiring to the software as opposed to the hardware that allows us to be so expansive and able to explore and dominate the different domains, right? So we are generalists in that sense, but I also think that we are giving ourselves too little credit in assuming that we only the most neurotypical, or mostly it is those who are neurotypical who are able to focus, because I think to some degree we have different strategies we can occupy.
Not able to focus, but like just play a single game in this tunnel vision focused manner.
Sure. I would even doubt that, because I am wondering to what degree we are able to enter different modes by sheer virtue of the circumstances we're put in. And I would say that especially if you are perhaps young and required to specialize, if you specialize very early and you're kind of forced to use what Yusri would call maybe growing up straight away, right? To give up on the child very early, I think that you acquire some capacity that is akin to that tunnel vision focus. And it's partially by that forcing of you to focus on one thing that you lose the potential, right, so to speak.
That's very interesting.
I would wonder what you guys have to say about that, because it's like a strategy. It doesn't make sense for nature to have left us completely open under all circumstances. And I see, especially with people who have been forced into a single domain very early on, I see their capacity to just be really good at that and to suffer as a result pretty much almost invariably on every other dimension to kind of make me wonder, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just an exploration. I haven't thought this through very much.
No, I really see that. I really do. I really see this. I don't know. I don't know if I'm kind of falsely linking here, but I sure have. As I grow up, I sure had this need to maybe to make something out of my life, and that usually comes in this wave of I need to be competent. I need to, which usually are companies. I need to make money. I need to be a pillar of the community, as Peterson would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really get that.
Zade, just to go back a bit, so we talked about mastery and we got lost in that. Can we discuss a few of the others as well? So after mastery, your principles.
Sure. I think another very important one is open access, right? The right, not just the privilege, the right to have this information, to have information ubiquitous everywhere in the world, because you cannot physically own information, right? You can own the applications of information. That's how patency works. You cannot own information. You do not create.
Yeah, that's a market failure.
Exactly. And economically, it's a market failure. You
public
cannot own
good.
it. But somehow, some people have managed to have found avenues to monopolize or create firewalls around these bits of information.
Oh, does that take you to open access?
Yes, and this is, most of these principles were based on just my hypothesis of what a most optimized education empirically would be. But this one specifically, open access, is more of a moral thing. Like it speaks to universal morality, right? This is a general human right. If you're gonna say killing is wrong, right, because you're taking something away from someone, then denying people I'm not saying education, but denying them information is wrong also, because you're also the same by the same virtue taking something away from them.
I agree, but also I agree to an extent. Okay, I agree to the extent in which it exists now. I'm with you on that. I believe I'm with you on the,
because we have the internet, you mean?
The million firewalls you have to go through. Not million, but
a lot.
The reason I can't get, the reason, for example, a certain paper costs me like $30 or like $12 or whatever to download. Everyone can always just use LibGen or whatever, Sci-Hub. But then,
Archive.
Yeah. But then, really, I think it shouldn't be as expensive. But I also, with the declining incentive, for scientists to join, do research and all that, I think there should be some. Maybe there should be another way.
Right, but you're talking about the most advanced level. This what you're talking about is the development of new information, right? I'm talking about general, developed, formalized information. Now, this speaks back to something I was going to talk about when we were talking about mastery, but I think we kind of got lost in other tangents. If I can just go back to that for a second.
Go ahead.
Maybe mastery is the wrong word. I think proficiency, as you suggested, would be a better word. And proficiency in the ability to have a framework for whatever discipline that can be applied in any situation. What I mean by that is, if you are only required to know a specific amount of chemistry for your occupation, then you should have the general framework of chemistry, the entire framework, but the generalized framework, and only get thicker. Let's call it thicker, like physically thicker. The more you're required to know based on your job or your general trajectory in life or whatever.
But then you're tying it back again to financial incentive, yeah?
Financial incentives? I don't follow.
Well, you said that you're only going to be required to know more based on your job, right?
Or general trajectory in life. But what I mean is, everyone should have a general framework. For example, of the sciences. Like, you should know that there is a general phylogeny of life. You should know that there are basic principles which dictate what we call a life. Like, you have to have fulfilled specific requirements for an organism to be classified as a living organism, right? Such things should be ubiquitous. You should just know them, right? They're actually necessary for you to know in order to sustain life as a species, as a human species, or else.
I have a problem with that. So if in certain part of Europe, for example, it's common knowledge that evolution is a thing.
It's a fact.
It's a fact, and all. Yeah, it's common knowledge, right? But in Egypt, it's common knowledge that the world is not, that the Earth is not flat. Here's my problem with both these, right? Is that people don't know.
You have a problem with the Earth not being
no.
flat?
I'm glad we know that it's not, right? But
okay.
My problem is that people don't actually know why. Like,
how.
Or how, and that's a problem, right? Like, and then when people start to attack that, and this is where I think science turns into this ideological, or under the guise of science. I'm not saying that the actual scientific method. Science becomes this ideological. Science becomes dogma. You see this with the not to get political here or anything, but you see this with the extreme left going, "Oh, you don't believe in science." Oh, you don't, and you don't. It's not really an appeal to science or an actual understanding of the scientific method, but rather that there are certain things that also appeal to this political leaning. Yeah, exactly. That seem to make sense to them, and that's what I always see. It's not necessarily that people should have it that they all know that evolution is a fact, but also they should understand why evolution is real.
That would be part of the framework I'm speaking of. Right, this framework would be based on what we know currently. Like, this would be consensus. This is the general consensus of the people who, like, first and foremost, understand the extent of it, and something suggestive to the IUPAC that I mentioned earlier. Some kind of system that formulates a consensus of the current information we know, and it could be as reductionist as need be, right? Some frameworks need to be the base skeleton, right? It's just the baseline, and then everything else after that can be debatable, can be criticized, can be open to discussion. All that's fine, but the framework is just known. We've known this, right? We've known this for so long. We can substantiate it immensely, right? So
I have a question, if possible. Okay, do you want to go on?
No, I'm good.
Okay, I have a question. Maybe we can also conclude on that, thing, because we're nearing the 2-hour mark.
Oh, damn!
And okay, my question is: so how do we break all these political barriers, right? Because also, I understand the technical and resource barriers we're facing with all that, but then how do we break the political barriers? I mean, my chemistry, my AP chemist. No, it was AP. No, it was my chemistry teacher. He was giving me environmental science.
Yeah.
Right? And he tells me that evolution is not true because no, but listen. And he said it in the most arrogant, preposterous manner you can ever think. He goes he's like, he looks at me and it was so, he goes, because A cannot turn into B. And then he just, and
said the chemist, right? A chemist would say.
And
that is so crazy.
I'm sitting in class and all the people in my class that I've been having endless discussions with just look at me defeated.
Take that.
And I'm just what?
Out of the chemist's mouth. You heard it here first.
Yeah. So what is the first step we should be taking to break out of these?
Fire those people. I think that's a very good first step.
Yeah.
No, I mean this is where open access comes in. Open access would allow the ubiquitous access and usage of information that I mean, there's no. I mean, you can argue all you want, but the information is ever present, you know, and you can't do anything about it. Well, I mean, that's supposing that open access becomes a universal reality, right? Once you have open access, and this by the way speaks to I think Masood was talking about this last time. The theory by you mentioned the book. I think it was Rawls, John Rawls.
Yeah, John Rawls.
That you have
theory of justice.
The tendency or like wanting to be progressive is actually just beneficial for you, based on the fact that
the veil of ignorance.
Exactly, the veil of ignorance, based on the fact that you can fall within any set position in civilization, and you would obviously want the better side of the coin, right? You'd want the better outcome. So it's just a logical conclusion that you'd be progressive, right? This also is the same for open access. It's a logical conclusion. You'd want open access because of the fact that you would have ended up anywhere in the world, or your kids might end up anywhere in the world, and you'd want for them to have access to this information and to be able to discover new avenues of knowledge and not have the current system imposed on them on what they should be doing with their life.
No, I mean, it's a good dream to have. It's a good purpose to have. No, I absolutely agree. It's just the method. Just how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that without sacrificing actual research and actual, people going forward and gaining the knowledge that we have, we'd get to read afterwards,
The issue is always incentives, right?
Economic consent.
I think many of the good intentions we have are constrained and vitiated by our inability to conceive of appropriate incentive structures within which they can be embedded. And so our struggle is really this moving forward, and it is to understand what incentives we should build in. And your principles are, I think, good guiding principles. I think I would pressure you a lot on the notion of open access for information, but I wouldn't necessarily even disagree there. I think your principles are quite vital as guiding principles, but the incentives, I'm really excited to see what you come up with in terms of your program, obviously, and whatever else you come up with as kind of an ushering of this era into our institutional educational systems. But yeah, I think at this point we should just end this podcast and maybe return at a later point. So with that said, thank you, Zade, for coming. It's been a great discussion and we've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Youssef, as well, obviously.
Thanks. You're welcome.
I just want to say thank you guys. It's truly been an honor and a privilege to be on this podcast and to talk to you guys. As always,
Zade, this has been so organic and nice.
Yeah, it's been so good. It's been so easy.
Yeah,
you don't get it.
If I can have like a closing statement, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
I mean, I've told you guys this before, especially before it was a podcast, but I want to say to everyone listening to that this is what you're doing here is just amazing, right? Maybe not like it's not as appreciated in the Western world because this is everywhere. Like everyone has podcasts, everyone talks openly, but here in the Arab world, this isn't as ubiquitous as some may think, right? In fact, this is unprecedented. I've never heard of this kind of podcast before, even this kind of just open dialogue before, right? And this is vital to the development of the Arab world in the new era of modernization, right? So I truly appreciate this so much, and I think everyone listening in the Arab world, whether now or whatever 20 years later for posterity reasons, still I mean they're gonna appreciate this, and this is gonna get big, and I was honored to be part of it. Thank you.
Oh man, thank you.
I appreciate you, brother. Zizo, only on an island.
Only on an island.
I have actually issues with that, but we can talk about that one on the next podcast.
We'll talk about it. Don't worry. We'll talk about it.
We'll extend the sentiment anyway, right?
Yeah. All right, guys. Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening, guys. If you're interested in helping us continue this, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and make sure you check out our Patreon. And yeah, we're on YouTube very soon.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.